Hi everyone, my name is Kartik and my channel is about mental models. In this video I'll be talking about the second order thinking mental model. This one, second order thinking, is similar to that of first principles in that it requires more mental energy. But using this mental model also means that you'll be able to set yourself apart from many others, because most people don't use second order thinking as it's hard, it's uncertain, and it adds complexity. In a nutshell, second order thinking is about thinking of the consequences, from the effects, from the actions, or from one's actions. Another way to think about it is if we have, and I'll take you through a little example. If you have a problem or a question, you want to solve that. So in order to do that, you take some action, and from that action there is, I'll use a different colour, there is an effect, and this effect of the action is the first, that's the first order. But then there are also consequences of the effect. Let's use another colour. And this is the second order, this consequence. So now let's say this consequence is actually a bad consequence. It was an unintended bad consequence, because intentionally we would like a positive outcome, but let's say there was an unintended bad consequence. Second order thinking is to think about this inadvertent problem and do something about it in the first place at the action stage, such that it doesn't happen at all. And so by using this mental model, by using second order thinking, it helps us to understand unintended consequences as well. Otherwise, what happens is you make a decision that leads to an inadvertent problem, you put in a fix, then there's another problem, and then you put in a second fix, and so on and so forth. And what you end up doing is course correction, not second order thinking. So before second order thinking, there is first order thinking. So let's take a step back and work through this. And it starts off from something like, I have a task or a problem at hand which I want to resolve or complete. And so let's say I've been invited to an event. That's the scenario. And the question is essentially, how do I look nice? How do I look good for the event? And so my action that I'm going to take is I'm going to put on some nice clothes, and I'm going to put on this face cream which one of my family members uses. So it's lying around in the house, they use it, makes them look nice, I'm going to use it as well. And that's the action that I'm going to take. And the effect of that action is from the, say that the face cream is, I'll use a different colour. Let's say it's got active ingredients which absorb into the skin and act in various ways to make you look nice. So that's the effect. That's the first order. And then there's a consequence of that effect. The absorption of the key ingredients into the skin leads to, 10 minutes later down the line, rashes. You break out into a rash. And so this is the consequence of the effect, and this is therefore the second order. That was the first. So the rashes, which is the consequence of the effect from the action, is what is the second order. And so what you do is you have to go to this event. You can't just leave the rashes on there. So you put on some, I suppose, medication. And the medication will help to reduce the appearance of the rashes. But what this is your course correction. And it's not wrong to take course correction. You need to do something. And so that's the right step to take in this scenario. But had you thought about the unintended consequence, that the rashes, using the face cream, that you might break out into a rash, you might have thought about reading the ingredients on the face cream bottle when you took the action to apply the face cream. So here. And so if you'd read the ingredients, you might have noticed that you've got an allergy to one of them. And so essentially you wouldn't have used the face cream. You'd have stopped using, or you would have not used that in the first place. And therefore you would have not had this inadvertent problem. You might have just washed your face or something instead of using the face cream. Or maybe you've got another face cream that you could have used. There's an alternative. And so that's how we can use second order thinking to stop an inadvertent problem happening. So this is a nice sort of linear, simple example. So how do we do this in reality with many other scenarios, many other examples? So the way to do this, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, I'm just going to call this list. So the first thing you need to ask yourself, and it's a question, and the question is, and then what? And then what? I do this, I do that, and then what? That happens, this happens, and then what? That's the question. The second thing is you need to think about time. And I said at the beginning that second order thinking is hard, it's complex, it's uncertain. This is where the uncertainty is, because you need to think about what could happen in, say, 15 minutes, 2 weeks, 6 months, 5 years. And the longer the time span, the greater the uncertainty, because trying to work out what the consequences of an action today is in 5 years, there's inherent uncertainty in that, and it's very difficult to do. And the third thing in the list is trees. And what that means is to write your actions, your effects, and your consequences as a tree, so you can map it out easier. Now, this is complicated. It's definitely not easy to think in terms of systems, interactions, and, as I mentioned, time. Thinking too far down the future brings, as I say, uncertainty, and drawing things out in a tree structure is, again, not easy. Now, at the start, I also mentioned that you could set yourself apart from others. And the power of this mental model is to understand or to realize that you could have a first order result which is negative, but a second order consequence which is positive. And many won't see beyond the first order. They will just sort of stop there. They will say, okay, I'm going to take this action and this is the effect, and that's it. But if an action doesn't show any near-term payoff, if the effect is negative. But if you think deeper and the second order consequence actually is positive, it could be an extraordinary outcome where if it was negative you just stop, but had you continued you get a very good outcome. And this can go on further into the third order. Even after sort of this stage you can go on further, and there's the third order as well. And so if you've got a scenario, let's call it S1, scenario 1, your first order thinking might be negative, but then your second order thinking might result in a positive outcome, and your third order might also result in a positive outcome. And if you had stopped here, you could really miss out on something very, very good. In another scenario, let's say S2, you've got similarly a negative first order, you've got a positive second order, but your third order is also negative. And in this case, you would need to do a bit more thinking about how you would wish to proceed. And the idea is, by going through this exercise, you'd be thinking deeper, and it would allow you to make a more informed decision and hopefully to get to a better result. Another example, completely different. Let's say you own a home and you have a mortgage, and pre-pandemic days, so early 2020, your mortgage lender writes to you and suggests to fix your mortgage. So they're giving you a proposal. They're saying, why don't you fix your mortgage? You're on a variable rate. They want to fix your mortgage. And they offer you various fixed tenures, let's say 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. That's what's being offered. And all the amounts, so you're on a variable rate, but all the amounts that they're offering in this fixed rate are slightly lower. Slightly lower, not too much. They're just a little bit lower than what you're paying on the variable rate per month. But there's also, for a fee for arranging this, and there's also an exit charge as well if you wish to leave earlier than the 10 years. And so you look at this and you think, well, actually, I'm not getting too much back. I'm not saving too much in a lower monthly payment because it's too little. But the fee is so much more, so I'm actually paying a lot more up front, and then there's this exit charge that I need to think about. And so the immediate payoff is actually negative, and you could just stop there and think, well, actually, I'll just leave this. But if you thought a bit further and you thought, well, interest rates, again, this is early 2020, interest rates are low. They can't get much lower. Brexit has happened. That could have an impact. If I look at this fee payment, if I divide the amount that I have to pay across the fixed 10 years, across the years, then the amount is actually not bad when it's divided across the full term, whatever term it is. And also there's this, again, early 2020, there's this flu-like situation in China, which we now come to know as COVID. But back in early 2020, we didn't know how serious it was going to be. But there is something happening which is on the news, which is something that we may wish to consider. And so fast forward to today, if you'd done that further analysis back then and you thought, actually, let's go with it, the second order thinking is actually quite positive here. The first order is negative, but the second order is quite positive. So let's go with it. Then in hindsight, today, with the way interest rates are, with the way the cost of living situation is, with the way inflation has been for a little while, the geopolitical situation, the decision which looked bad initially isn't as bad now. And certainly it's much more positive. And so this is how second order thinking can be used to make a more informed decision, where the immediate payoff isn't so worthwhile, but could be much, much better in the future. And so this is second order thinking. So to sum up, I just want to go back to this list. Always ask yourself, and then what? Think in terms of time. What could happen in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, 2 weeks, 6 months, 5 years, etc. That's difficult, but it's necessary. And use trees. And by trees, I mean you've got, say, you've got an action, or you could take, let's say you've got, let's start off with the problem. And you can take a couple of actions, in fact, and then they have a couple of effects. And out of those, you have your consequences, which are, you've got the intended one and the unintended one, and this effect has a consequence which is intended and a consequence which is unintended. And the same here. You've got, and this is consequences which are intended and consequences which are unintended. And this is the tree structure I'm talking about. And in certain cases you might have a few more unintended consequences. And it's about listing all of these out, the positive and the negative consequences in a tree structure. And if this is difficult to do, if this is not easily evident, then just mapping the scenario out in this sort of linear fashion, just writing it out like this, will also work. Even using lists will also work. But trees is the way I like to think about it. But it's about writing these things down, which can help elaborate and enunciate all of the effects, the consequences and the actions. And the fourth thing, which I haven't put down, is aspects. Now there may be aspects which are connected. So in our fixing the mortgage scenario, I talked about Brexit, I talked about COVID. And so these are aspects which are connected. And at the time when you're doing your thought process, when you're analysing the situation, you might not have all the information. And so the idea here is to do a bit of research, put the time in and see what could affect the outcome, what could lead to an unintended consequence. Again, it's hard, it's not easy, but that's where the value is. And so this is second order thinking in a nutshell. Thank you for watching. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one with another mental model. Thank you. Bye-bye.